Welcome to the Russell Reynolds Associates Sustainable Leadership in Action podcast channel. Russell Reynolds Associates is a top global leadership advisory and search firm. We help our clients build teams of transformational leaders who can meet today's challenges and anticipate the digital, economic, and political trends that are reshaping the global business environment. This series highlights unique leaders and organizations that are leading the way in achieving sustainability goals and transforming the global landscape. In each episode, we will hear from sustainability champions on how to govern consciously and enhance the organization's environmental and social footprint. Thank you for listening to the Russell Reynolds Associates Sustainable Leadership in Action podcast.
Good morning. My name is Philip de Forsche. I'm a managing director at Russell Reynolds Associates in charge of the Brussels office. With me today is Jacques Bouwens, managing director with the firm from our Amsterdam office. We're both members of Russell Reynolds board and CEO advisors practice. We have the tremendous pleasure to welcome Thomas Leysen, prominent entrepreneur and industrialist. Welcome, Thomas.
Good morning.
Thomas is today the chairman of Mediahuis, chairman of Umicore, and chair of the supervisory board of Koninklijke DSM. Amongst many other past and current roles, Thomas also served as chairman of KBC Group, and he was the president of the Federation of Enterprises in Belgium. He's also the chairman of the King Baudouin Foundation and was the founding chairman of The Shift, a coalition of businesses and NGOs in Belgium promoting sustainable development. Which brings us to the topic of today. I remember vividly, Thomas, our very first conversation. Must have been some 20 years ago when you were appointed CEO of Umicore. Sitting in your offices in the Broekstraat in Brussels, you shared a compelling vision of how you would continue to work hard in order to transform Umicore from a metals producer to a materials technology group with leading positions in battery materials, automotive catalysts, and precious metals recycling. You've been very vocal about the importance of sustainability, and you've put your money and your time where your mouth is. Again, thank you for being with us today. Jacques, may I invite you to kick off this conversation?
Absolutely. Thank you, Philippe. And Thomas, we promise you that we would have some very intriguing and very personal questions in this as well. Right?
Great.
So you're obviously well known for sustainability and to be highly committed to it. But deep inside you, what does sustainability mean for you?
The definition that I very often refer to is the definition given by an English author, Jonathan Porritt. He said, sustainability is the capacity for continuance into the long-term future. And as such, this capacity for continuance into the long-term future has to be the end goal for our planet, but it has to be also the goal for any organization. So I think sustainability is very much about, yes, thinking about the long term, thinking about can you go on doing the things that you're doing? How do I project myself in the future? Look at the planetary boundaries, the societal boundaries, and start from there to define what you have to do today.
When it comes to sustainable development, Thomas, what is your personal drive? When did that become a motivator for you?
I've always been interested in environmental issues, and that's part of the sustainability context, of course. Actually, it started at school. I was at school in part of the environmental movement. I had with some friends, we were almost activists in those days, and actually two of my classmates went on to become later on presidents of Greenpeace in Belgium.
Wow.
I made a slightly different career turn. Certainly in the 70s, this was a theme that interested me. It was slightly different. The focus was slightly different then. It was much about pollution and air pollution and water pollution. It was very much initially focused on environmental issues, and this is still a very, very large part of it.
Would you say your thinking about sustainability has developed over time?
When I was in the 70s, the word climate change or the issues around climate change weren't even known. So that's something that's obviously become a very, very major focus because it's the most pressing issue that we have today. And so it's the focus of much attention, but other issues like biodiversity, water usage, etc., become more and more prominent. So on the environmental front, the themes have broadened and deepened. and at the same time the social and governance issues have become much more important in the whole thinking about sustainability. So there's been very clearly an evolution.
What would you say has been your largest success so far, or the element you're most proud of today?
What I'm proud of, and it's not a personal success as such, it's obviously a collective endeavor that we did with many people, but the transformation of Umicore is a good story because, we really transformed a company that was an old school metals producer with a heavy environmental legacy, not very well liked, into a company that today is really making a contribution to a sustainable development through its technologies, through its activities, that has dealt in, I hope, a responsible way with its historical legacy. Doesn't mean that we don't have any challenges still ahead of us, but overall we've made a very profound transformation in the activities of the company, in the culture of the company, in the public perception of the company. And at the same time, while doing that, we've created also a lot of value. Umicore's market capitalization in 2000 was about 600 million euros. Today it's 12 billion. So it's actually also a demonstration, and that's why I like to talk about the Umicore story, that by doing the right things, you actually can create over time value. So this was obviously a very exciting journey, and I'm happy about that. You also referred to my time as chairman of KBC Group, which is a banking insurance group, a leading banking insurance group in Europe and Belgium and in Central Europe. When I became chair just after the financial crisis, we obviously had maybe some very short-term issues to deal with, and it wasn't all about the long-term. But as we resolved these short-term issues and put the company back on the right footing, we really also, and there I think the role of the board was really important. We kicked off a reflection on what sustainability meant for a financial institution. And that was a very interesting journey, and I also look back with some pleasure on that.
In the precious metals industry, it's a very clear, visible goal. But in the services or financial services industry, it's quite different. So with the insight you have of today and having gone through those journeys, are there mistakes you made or things you would have done differently with what you know today?
Oh, undoubtedly, you learn as you go forward, and there are certain things that you would have done quicker in a more radical way, maybe some experiments that didn't quite work out. But I think that's always like that in life. I mean, as a leader, you take charge and you try to instill a vision, you make decisions, so you make a number of good decisions, hopefully more good decisions than bad decisions. But it's a journey, and you have to learn from that. And clearly, many insights have been developed over the years, and also the societal context has changed. But I'm glad that Umicore was among the pioneers in that field and talked about circular economy in 2000, maybe 15 years before it became a household word. So I think we got a number of things right, but there's a few things I would certainly have done differently.
And what would those be?
Well, like dealing more radically with a number of issues still. I think that is, if I look back at things I would do differently, I think a number of things I would have done earlier, should have done earlier.
Yeah. How you drive the transformation in your organization. So like what methodology, what have you used in order to convince management teams or to get buy-in to make the transition and get focused on sustainability?
Many people, in my experience, are very willing to go in that direction. When we made the shift in Umicore and we put this front and center, I think it was felt as very enthusing by very many people in our company. The pride in the company increased. Umicore in the past had some issues around historical pollution. We had been more in a mode of denial or of damage control, of limitation. And the day that we said we would proactively tackle and take full responsibility for this, this was an expensive day for us because it was a commitment of more than 150 million euros that we undertook at that time. But it was enormously liberating for many of our managers who had been trained to minimize, to talk around these issues, and now there was enormous pride that the company said, okay, this is some problems we have from the past, but we are dealing with them, and we are dealing with them proactively, and we're not trying to shift those issues to society. So I think overall there is a big enthusiasm, but there needs to be also a sense that it's genuine and that it is not only talk, but that we walk the talk. And because there's a degree of skepticism, is it greenwashing even internally in the company? Is this just more public relations exercise, or do we really make the trade-offs in the right way? I can remember a very important element, and I can share this now. We had one plant can even say it was in France, and we found out that we had some emissions which were not according to the norm. And some managers in the plant had actually falsified these publications to the authorities, because they felt, for some reason, it's very difficult to tackle this, and this could create real problems. And if we disclose this, and they had falsified this. So at a certain stage, we found out through an audit, and we had to decide what to do about it. And indeed, it was such that it was outside of our permit. So the authorities could, if we disclosed it, immediately decide to stop the plant with very significant financial consequences. At that time, I decided with my colleagues on the management board, we would, first of all, we needed to disclose this, we needed to take the risks, but decided also to make a bit of a case study. And so we called the top senior management of the company. We said, this is what has happened. We're now going to report it. I give the team 2 or 3 days to prepare a case about what can we do about it to remediate it, so that we have a story towards the authorities. This is what has happened. This is the reality. This is what we are going to do, and please give us some time to course correct. And it was, in the end, it worked out well. We reported it. The authorities weren't happy, but they gave us some credit for coming up with it ourselves. And we actually found solutions quite quickly to remediate the problem. But I think it was a very powerful moment in educating our people that we really meant it. I think in the previous situation, it might have been dealt with in a very different way. So I think these teachable moments are very important to show to the organization that you really mean it, that it is something that has become part of your DNA and not just an exercise that you do because you are required to do it or because you're expected to do it.
Did it occasionally lead to questions around whether you could continue with certain managers, or personnel decisions that were impacted by whether people were aligned with what you wanted to achieve?
As I said, I think most people, as soon as they feel that you really mean it as top leadership, are really very willing to follow. But others, have been so ingrained in a different way of thinking that in some cases, yes, it has led to saying these people are really not part of the company for the future. They will find it so hard to adapt or to really integrate this culture into their behaviors, that we've made some tough decisions on people. But I think it is an area where a lot of, especially in the initial stages, where a lot of teaching is needed. When I was CEO, I spent a lot of time on roadshows. It was before the time of digital town halls, so I visited 20 plants a year. I think Umicore at that time had maybe 80 plants around the world. I visited some 20 years, and each time we did a town hall meeting with the people, addressing them and explaining what the values of the company were. And we talked about some of the business issues, but we talked about sustainability, about culture. And I think that was a big investment in time, but it was absolutely necessary. And my colleagues on the executive committee did just the same. And so I think that is how we really changed the culture at Umicore.
Changed from the top and visible leadership.
Yeah.
In your board meetings, how is sustainability covered? Is it a separate topic, or is it basically touching upon all the topics?
Well, It's certainly sustainability has, in the first instance, to be integrated into the strategy of the company. And so these broad issues around sustainability and what they mean for the company, what they mean for the strategy of the company, that has to be at the core of the strategy formulation. And so that the board has to think through and the management has to think through and formulate a strategy that takes that into account. So that is, I would say, an issue that should always be, in a way, in the back of our mind and should be part of the real strategic discussions. Then there is the questions around the targets that you set yourselves operationally, around CO2 reduction, the road to net zero, water usage, all these other themes. These need to be reviewed periodically by the board. I have in a number of companies, we've had, for example, instituted a sustainability dashboard that gets really discussed in depth every 6 months to see which parameters are we evolving in the right way, where are we on track or ahead of schedule, and where are we lagging behind, where do we have issues, so that there's a systematic discussion about these issues at the board in a regular way. At the DSM, there's a sustainability committee which digs ahead of every board meeting into some of the issues and opportunities and discusses that in great depth. So there's a variety of means to deal with it, but I think that every board today has to deal with that. And you see that you also need to bring specific expertise to the board on those issues.
And are there specific debates or contrary points of views on sustainability, so that you have some? So is it very much like we all think alike, or are there real debates about different perspectives on how to achieve this?
There have certainly been. I can remember, and I'm not going to go into the details here, but I can remember some debates which were controversial, where some people felt very strongly about certain issues, and others said, "Well, is it really all that crucial, or can we go that far?" So, I mean, these debates happen from time to time. I think also you have sometimes discussions where some board members are really passionate and well-informed, and others are less cognizant of the issues and maybe take more of a backseat in those discussions. So you have that, but I think overall the discussion at the board level, and certainly in the boards that I'm participating in, and that's maybe part also of the selection process of the people that you get on the board, that these discussions are pretty mature and pretty well informed. And certainly a company like DSM, which has also been a leadership, I just joined the board there and took on the chairmanship. Yeah, there's a real very strong, deep knowledge and culture in the company. It's really one of those companies that has put it at the center of their purpose, of their activity, of their strategy, and it's very much part of the DNA, also of the board.
Yeah. And as a European industrialist and a member of, for instance, the Bilderberg Group, do you see a change in the pace of adoption or change or commitment, conviction that things really need to change now? Or
yes, very much so, and that's partly driven by broader realization that these issues really matter, that they are not only really matter, but they are crucial for success, that those companies that will thrive in the 21st centuries are those companies that really integrated into their strategic thinking as well as into their operational and into their culture. So I think that realization has intensifified very much in the last 4 or 5 years. And I think now also the societal pressure and the pressure from stakeholders has intensified. And that is really a movement of the last 2 years. If you see now that virtually every multinational has now to set clear targets on its road to CO2 emissions or to net zero. And I think many more and more are going to saying net zero. Some can do it by 2030, some can do it by 2035, some can project to do it by 2050. But these are not good gratuitous statements. If a multinational publishes these targets, then a whole organization of 10,000 or 100,000 people needs to move into that direction and needs to move. So I think that is really, really changed. You also have the pressure from financial markets. I've seen that in KBC. Also the shift to SRI investments, socially responsible investments, ESG-themed funds, sustainability-linked funds, is a massive shift. I remember when I started at KBC and we discussed this the first time. KBC had always been a forerunner in these sustainability funds, but still it was about 6 or 7% of the total asset management products that we sold were ESG related, and that was being a front runner. But then we put it more prominently, and society changed. And I think today it's probably 50% of new production of investment funds is with a sustainability linkage. That obviously means that the pressure from the financial markets also gets to the companies in a much bigger way. In the past, you could say, okay, we don't really care about being part of the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, or we don't want to fill in all those questionnaires. I mean, that becomes also much more difficult. And then, last but not least, the regulatory pressure is also intensifying. All the initiatives that exist at the European level are following each other. So there's, from many points of view, an acceleration. And I really see that in the last 2 years that there's been a real pivot from something that was discretionary, that was part of your own conviction, that was for the front runners, for the more progressive companies, to something that everyone has to deal with. I think the pressure from society, from regulators, from political fields, from financial markets, from individual investors, that is accelerating the pace.
In selecting board members and executives in your teams, how do you tick that sustainability box? How do you check for that?
Well, I think it's definitely part of the recruitment conversation. I've been involved in some executive selection, and it's certainly something that it recently featured very prominently in the discussions, to see how much people had actually understanding of the issues beyond the broad themes and slogans and that everyone knows. I mean, really probe deeper for when you recruit executives, what they have already done in their career that is tangible, that is concrete, that they demonstrate an understanding of all the core issues. And for board members, it's the same. I think in those companies that really find this important, it has to be part of the conversation. In certain instances, you recruit real experts in these fields, but not everyone can or need to be a real expert in that. But you really need to feel convinced that every board member has at least a basic literacy in the ESG topics, and even more important than that, has the right instincts.
Yeah. What a powerful message. So what you say is that it has become an integral part of what you look for in a candidate.
Indeed, I think it has changed a lot in the last couple of years, and in a way, I'm really happy. In the past, I was maybe one of those who preached about these issues and a bit of a forerunner. I think it's becoming gradually mainstream. I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We'll see in the next couple of years how much companies make progress and how much this actually results in change. I feel really more optimistic about it.
Is that a tricky challenge, or do you see more and more candidates that actually meet your bar? How many candidates would you not consider because they don't have what you expect them to have?
I don't have statistics on it, but I remember in a recruitment interview that took place not more than a month ago, where we had various candidates, and we were in a small committee, and we probed a bit deeper about climate change. And one candidate didn't go beyond the slogans, and didn't really demonstrate an in-depth understanding of some of the real challenges and of the real mechanics around it. And so that was the end of that conversation.
Wow.
To wrap up, because I think it's a very optimistic conversation, and a lot of progress has been made. But if you look at the next 5 to 10 years, what needs to happen and what is going to happen in your mind?
I think the biggest challenge that the world faces is climate change, because that is really, we are at the tipping point, and either we make it or we go towards major problems. So I think that is where the biggest and the most pressing action needs to be. Are we going to make it in time? As I say, I'm indeed more optimistic than 2 or 3 years ago because I see both governments and corporations acting more decisively. That being said, there's huge challenges. There's a lot of technology to be developed. There's a lot of capital to be redeployed. There's a lot of behaviors to be changed, and not only in Western Europe and not only in the Western world. China is probably on track to get it. I think India, other parts of the world still have a long way to go. So the challenges are still tremendous, but at least I feel that the momentum is happening. But everything needs to chip in. I mean, it's not a question of shifting the responsibility just to governments or just to corporations or just to consumers. No, if we are going to make it on climate change, it will need to mean that we have smart regulation, that we have a tremendous amount of innovation that comes from academia and from the corporate world. We need quite a bit of behavioral change from consumers, from voters as well, that reward governments that take courageous action and not vote them out of office. It will take change of behavior in the corporate world, really making trade-offs in a much more holistic way and in a much more sustainable way. So a lot needs to happen, but I'm more optimistic than I was 2 years ago that the world will make that.
Thomas, very happy to hear that you're very hopeful, and that's a promising end of our conversation, which I found truly inspiring and very insightful. Philippe and I would like to thank you also on behalf of the audience on spending time with us on this very important topic of sustainable leadership.
Thank you for listening to the Russell Reynolds Associates Sustainable Leadership in Action podcast. To receive leading insights and add your voice to our global conversation, please subscribe to the Russell Reynolds Associates channel on the podcast app and share via LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. We look forward to you joining us on the next episode.